Thank you so much, Linda, and it's so nice to see you again. And I know
Yes,
I'm hoping Kamira is here somewhere, so I can also say hi, Kamira. It's lovely
exactly.
to be working with you. um,
It's
so, uh, I've stayed in touch with teacher education with regards to technology and integrating technology. And one of the big things that I've been working with the last year and a half, yeah, almost a year and a half, one of my projects has been working with the Malawian teacher preparation program. So in Malawi, they have 8 uh, TTCs, teacher preparation colleges, where the teachers go to learn how to become teachers, and they spend about 2 years at the TTCs. And this course was developed that I'm going to talk to you about it, or the different courses was developed specifically for the Malawian context. Um, so let me go forward. There we go. I worked with a really, really great person, Daniela Kachango. You might know her. She was a CPT. She's at UCT at the moment, and we just worked on this program together. So let me tell you a little bit about what it was. So our students were all the TTC lecturers, all it was ICT coordinators and just ordinary method subject teachers, math, science, English, Afrikaans not, but the different languages that they have, and they had experience from having just joined the TTCs to having been there for 30 odd years. And what had happened was, because of the pandemic, everybody was moving to online spaces, and this became an urgency to how to integrate technology. So we were working from South Africa, Daniela and I, and we were working with the Malawian lecturers to develop a course for them on how to integrate technology. But this had been coming for some time. It wasn't something that just happened in a vacuum. The German government and various other stakeholders had provided tablets, iPads to the different TTCs so that they could start using the iPads. And I'll tell you later about what happened with those iPads. And then, so they provided all this infrastructure, and then they provided data. And what had happened was, then the lockdown happened, and nothing could be done with regard to the workshops that they wanted to plan on how to use the technology to integrate it in the classroom. So now all these tablets were all at the TTCs, everything was locked down, and they couldn't do anything with it. So the German government said, well, let's just do online courses. Now, if you know Malawi, you'll know that it's the country with the third highest data costs in the world. So this poor country has to pay exorbitant fees on data, and the internet facilitators internet providers are so not trustworthy. So one day they'll have service, and the next day they won't. So that was a problem. So I'm just talking to you a little bit about the context and the people and how they experience the learning. And then, of course, so Daniela and I would sit and work in South Africa, and we would say, okay, we definitely have to use this tool. Then when we get to Malawi, we very quickly learned you've got to let the Malawians see if they can actually find the tool on their app store and actually download it. And tools as simple as Wakelet or Capwing, they couldn't download it. It was just not in the app store. So this is a huge contextual difference to us. And then, of course, we have the funders sitting in the back going, you've got to do Microsoft courses. You've got to teach them how to use Microsoft. But if you work on a tablet and trying to do Excel spreadsheets on a tablet or a phone, it's almost impossible if you don't have a stylus to work in the little cells. And so the funders were very different to, their expectations were very different to what the teachers were wanting to achieve. So we had this very strong emphasis right at the start on using Microsoft tools, and and the funders were very anti-Google. We couldn't use Google Suite because of the European regulations with regards to security and privacy settings. So we had to use Microsoft, and then and that places a lot of emphasis on what you can and what you can't do. And then the access was these tablets, but the tablets had been pre-programmed with apps. So when the funders had given them the tablets to the TTCs, there was a set amount of apps, and unless you were the admin, and there's only one admin, you couldn't download any more apps. So you only had to work what was in the browser, what was available in the browser. So during lockdown, they provided data bundles to all the apps so that the TTCs, and they wanted the lecturers to travel from their rural homes to the TTCs to work on the tablets. But then eventually they relaxed that rule, and they said, okay, they could take the tablets home during lockdown. And then the very strong emphasis was the expectation that a course on ICT integration should very much work on transforming teaching and learning and not just replicating the status quo. And the expectations of different stakeholders, different people involved about their priorities and what was important to them and what they perceived to be doable or not doable and how it was impacting their practices was a big issue. Because that also shaped the inherent value that they thought they would get from this course. And very few of them could imagine what a changed teaching and learning looked like. So something similar to what I think happened around the world is that you want to take what is in a classroom context, a face-to-face context, and just transfer it to an online space. But you can't imagine how it would look differently if you transformed the teaching and learning. So that was managing the expectations around that was a big issue. And then the course development, let me just speak about OER. So the funders were also saying there's loads and loads and loads of OERs, there's loads and loads of open courseware. Just use open courseware. You don't have to develop anything from scratch. Or if you develop very little from scratch. And that impacted the course development because we spent 3 or 4 weeks just looking at OERs and trying to find OERs that would match the context of these teacher lecturers, and trying to understand how the OER could be used in a context where there's no connectivity or very low connectivity many days of the week. Or where there's no, that means if you go with your phone into a space, there's just no connectivity, there's no access, there's no service provider. So that's what I mean with no connectivity. Or if you do go, you've only got Edge. Do you remember we used to have something called Edge? So they would only have Edge. So if you sent them anything to download, it would take them hours to download something that would take us a couple of seconds in South Africa. So those were the expectations around the course. So now, if you can imagine, we're now in this space where everybody's trying to work online and offline during lockdown. Everybody's got the ICT champions are all over the internet telling people how to work online. And these poor lecturers are going, but who can we reach? Because our students are so poor that they don't actually have devices so that we can reach them. So in the world, as a tool to support sessions, to support students, and that's what I was going to just add on as well, is if you can't use Big Blue Button, please consider using WhatsApp, because the students, those students who can connect in low bandwidth spaces can usually use WhatsApp on pretty low devices as well. And then what we also found in this context, and I think that that's got a very big emphasis on what happens in South Africa as well, is that most devices were mobile devices. So when people accessed the learning was on phones or on mobile tablets, iPhones, iPads specifically. The phones were very rarely iPhones, but most of the tablets in this context was iPads. So, and then different people would have different capacities to working with these devices. So some would be able to use the device, the tablet, quite well. Others would have no idea how to use it. So those are the digital spaces that we worked in. And what we did was we looked at what we thought could work in a space, and then we used design thinking to develop these courses. And we worked with all the people, as many as wanted to be part of it, to develop this course overview right from the start. So Daniela would walk them through a persona activity where they would imagine the ideal person who would do a course in ICT integration. And everybody at their different campuses, you can see a photo here of the lecturers at one campus, they would draw a character, and then they would imagine what this character would need and what this character would want from an ICT integration course if it was a lecture. And then they would draw a student and what the student would want from the same space. So in that way, we empathized very deeply with who's the prospective person who wanted it. And from that, we drew up a course overview of what we thought these lecturers would want from the course, what would help them in their context, how would it help them in their context. We developed a prototype, and then we had what we call master trainers, and it's the wrong word, and it's not the right concept master trainers, but it works that construct. So we used the word master trainers, and it was a group of about 40 teaching and training college lecturers, TTC lecturers, who were au fait with using technology in their spaces. They said that they used it, they used their laptop or their desktop at the office a lot, and that they felt that they were good at using their phones as well. So we worked with these master trainers, and they did the first iteration, and this was in July, this started, the first iteration started, and we would present little workshops from South Africa to Malawi, and it was the most incredible experience. You would hear the ducks and the donkeys in the background, and one of the things that really struck me, and it really shouldn't, but was the amount of fathers who participated and who were the children's caregivers. So the mother was off somewhere, and the father would be with the children on his lap, participating in the course. It is a very, very beautiful context that we were working in. So all of the master trainers were working on the first course that we did. We're working on that during lockdown at their homes on their tablets. And so what we've done was, the first course that we developed was called the Integrating Education Technologies in Teaching and Learning, ITTL. And it was very focused on Microsoft because, of course, we have to manage the expectations of the funders, and they were saying use Microsoft. So we used Microsoft, and we found that almost no tablets, and none of the tablets were loaded with the latest version of Microsoft. So where we were thinking, okay, you can use Microsoft 365 because you've got data and you can access whatever, they couldn't update their Microsoft. So we were sitting with Microsofts that some of them were still XP, that they were using Windows XP, and it was terrible. the range of what we had to try and work with was just impossible, and we couldn't just go to Google Drive and say use that, because of course we couldn't use Google, and we couldn't get them to use Microsoft Online. So it was a bit of a mess up in that space, but we found workarounds. And then when we wanted them to download a Microsoft link, a Word document or PDF or something like that, it would take them hours to download, and then it would get halfway and it wouldn't finish downloading, and then the power would be off. So it was quite an interesting situation. So these were the first master trainers, but our throughput was almost 100% of them finishing these courses. So we did a week-long workshop, where we would work with them for about 4 hours every morning, and they would link up from wherever they were. A lot of cases they stayed at home, but a lot of people also actually worked online, and they would link up from the TTCs and join us from the TTCs, where they would go and join. And when I explain the TTC to you, I've got some photos for you later on where you can see it's rural. A lot of the classes happen outside under the trees. So it's really rural areas, and the resilience of these people was unbelievable. Then the master trainers gave us feedback, and from that feedback, we redeveloped the course completely, reconceptualized it to be a mobile course. So it was completely focused on how can you use your tablet, how can you integrate your tablet or your phone into the course. And then a lot of the TTC lecturers now had gone back to the TTCs, and they were now in a space where they were trying to catch up and get everybody ready, but they couldn't quite get everybody ready, and they still had to do this course. So they asked for what we called ITTL Lite, which only focused on how to use mobile learning in their spaces. So what we learned about this is the access was critical to focus, and I think this is a lesson that we could all use in South Africa really well, is to think around mobile and how do I design learning to be on a mobile. And one of the things that we learned very well was to develop SCORM packages. We first worked with Moodle, and trying to get the Moodle app to download, it was almost impossible because the Moodle app again wasn't loaded, and they couldn't download the offline version, and we wanted them to work offline. So we started working with, I don't know if you've heard of Adapt. So Adapt is an open source, just like Moodle, course authoring tool, and we developed the course in Adapt, and later on moved to other authoring tools that were better. But what would happen is you could develop the whole course, and they would download it to their phone, and they could then work offline in rural areas where there was no connectivity. And if you use Adapt on your servers, so you develop a server at the university for Adapt, and then you develop a course on Adapt. It's really excellent for the students to work offline with the same content. We learned very much around mentoring, and the master trainers were phenomenal to get the course done and to get throughput, and also to manage the expectations of different groups. So we imagined how they could learn to make videos. We imagined that in their context, they could use a stylus. So I showed them how to make styluses to be able to edit their videos and stuff. With feathers and whatever they had available, I showed them how to make stylus, and they loved it, and they could do it, and their resilience was incredible. So the whole point here was we need to manage not only the user's expectation, but also the stakeholders' expectations, and give them an imagined view of how it could be. And then also, it was a very much a co-creation process. It was never meant to be we sitting in South Africa developing a course for you that you have to do. It was very much around how do we co-create, co-think, co-design the whole learning process. And also our completion rate, we used, we first started using different tools to create, I worked book creator to create the e-portfolios. And oh, it was difficult. It was such a mission. So in the end, I changed. You might have heard of Padlet, and they create all the e-portfolios in Padlet, and they could put everything in Padlet and share it easily from a phone or wherever. And they made the e-portfolios in Padlet. It worked like a dream. So that was, again, to get the completion rate through, to use tools that the learning curve is so low that the user can learn how to use it almost straight away with very limited resources. So, and that's me. I hope I stayed in the time zone. Are there any questions or any comments or something you would like to know?
Well, from my side, I can just say, oh, this was lovely. It's always important to balance that expectations that you get from your funders, and obviously because they give the money, you have to be accountable. But on the other hand, sometimes the expectations are just so out of touch with what our learners want, isn't it? And that's why I particularly appreciate your co-design idea, the concept of bringing in different partners from different places with different perspectives, because it does make the final learn much richer one. I think we're over time already, but I think because it's